Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel, and today we are talking about a warning that is no longer theoretical, no longer distant, and no longer avoidable, because water has effectively ended for nearly 10 million people in Tehran, and what was once discussed as a future risk has now arrived as a present reality that is reshaping daily life, governance, and survival itself. Tehran is a city that grew faster than its resources, faster than its planning, and faster than its natural limits. And for decades it relied on underground water, seasonal rains, and aging dams to support an ever-expanding population that now finds itself facing a hard stop rather than a slow decline. This crisis did not appear overnight, but the speed at which it has escalated has shocked even long-time experts, because reservoirs that were expected to last years are now measured in weeks, and groundwater levels have dropped so low that parts of the city are physically sinking. Water rationing has moved from inconvenience to emergency, with entire neighborhoods experiencing dry taps for hours or days, forcing families to store whatever they can, reuse water repeatedly, and change basic habits that were once taken for granted. Hospitals, schools, and essential services are under pressure because water is not just for drinking. It is for sanitation, cooling, cleaning, and public health. And when supply becomes unreliable, every system built on it begins to strain. The phrase "final warning" is not media exaggeration in this case, because officials themselves are now admitting that without drastic action, Tehran could face a situation where regular water delivery becomes impossible for large segments of the population. Climate change plays a central role here, as rainfall patterns across Iran have become increasingly unpredictable, with long droughts replacing seasonal balance, reducing snowpack in mountains that once fed rivers and dams throughout the year. But climate alone does not explain the severity of the situation, because decades of over-extraction, inefficient agriculture, leaking infrastructure, and urban mismanagement have accelerated depletion beyond natural recovery. Groundwater has been treated like an infinite reserve, pumped faster than it can refill, causing land subsidence that damages roads, buildings, and pipelines, making the water crisis even harder to fix. Tehran's dams, once symbols of modern development, are now stark indicators of failure, with water levels dropping to historic lows, exposing cracked earth where water once stood. As the supply shrinks, demand continues to rise, driven by population growth, urban sprawl, and consumption habits that were never adjusted to match a drying climate. For ordinary residents, the crisis is deeply personal because it affects cooking, bathing, cleaning, and even sleep, as people stay awake to fill containers during short windows when water pressure returns. Businesses are struggling too, especially restaurants, laundries, and factories that depend on steady water flow, forcing some to reduce operations or shut down entirely. Public frustration is growing because people are being asked to conserve without seeing clear long-term solutions, and trust erodes when sacrifices feel one-sided or ineffective. Government responses so far include stricter rationing, emergency water transfers, and public awareness campaigns. But critics argue these measures treat symptoms rather than causes. Large-scale infrastructure projects are discussed, such as transferring water from distant regions or desalination, but these options are expensive, slow, and politically sensitive, especially in a country already facing economic pressure. There is also the question of equity, because water shortages rarely affect everyone equally, and poorer neighborhoods often experience longer outages and fewer alternatives, deepening social divides. Migration is becoming part of the conversation, as some families consider leaving Tehran altogether, not for jobs or politics, but simply because access to water can no longer be guaranteed. This raises the possibility of internal displacement, where environmental stress forces population movement within a country, reshaping demographics and regional stability. Historically, civilizations have risen and fallen based on water availability, and Tehran's situation is a modern reminder that technology does not cancel natural limits. Urban planners now face the challenge of rethinking what a sustainable city looks like in an arid region, where growth must be balanced against resource reality. Agriculture around Tehran also plays a role, as water-intensive crops consume massive amounts of water that could otherwise support urban needs, highlighting a conflict between food security and city survival. Fixing this crisis requires coordination across sectors, including agriculture reform, infrastructure repair, population planning, and climate adaptation, none of which offer quick wins. Public behavior matters too, because collective conservation can buy time, but only if people believe their efforts are part of a genuine long-term plan. Education becomes critical, not just telling people to use less water, but explaining why the crisis exists and how different choices affect shared outcomes. International observers are watching closely because Tehran is not unique, and what happens here could foreshadow water crises in other megacities facing similar pressures. The idea of day zero, when taps run dry completely, once seemed extreme, but Tehran's experience shows how quickly that line can approach. Emergency water trucking is already a reality in some areas, an image more often associated with disaster zones than capital cities. This normalization of emergency measures is dangerous because it can distract from systemic reform by making crisis response feel like routine management. Technological solutions exist, such as smart water grids, leak detection, and recycling systems, but they require investment, transparency, and time. Political will is perhaps the most important factor, because without honest acknowledgement of past mistakes, future policies risk repeating the same patterns. The water crisis also intersects with public health, as limited water access increases the risk of disease, poor hygiene, and mental stress. Children grow up adapting to scarcity, which shapes their expectations of normal life, turning what should be an emergency into a baseline experience. Women often bear a disproportionate burden, managing household water use, storage, and shortages, adding invisible labor to already demanding lives. Social tensions can rise as water becomes a source of conflict between neighborhoods, regions, and sectors competing for limited supply. History shows that water scarcity can destabilize societies if left unaddressed, not through sudden collapse, but through gradual erosion of trust and stability. Tehran's situation is a warning not just for Iran, but for any city relying on unsustainable extraction in a changing climate. The final warning is not about fear, but about urgency, because delays now mean harsher consequences later, with fewer options and higher costs. Solutions will require sacrifice, including reduced consumption, changes in agriculture, limits on urban expansion, and long-term investment that may not show immediate results. The question is not whether Tehran can return to the water abundance of the past, because that era is over, but whether it can adapt to a drier future without humanitarian crisis. Resilience means planning for less, not hoping for more, and aligning policy with reality rather than ambition. Citizens, experts, and leaders all play a role, because water security is not a single project, but an ongoing commitment. The story of Tehran's water crisis is still being written, and the choices made now will define the city for generations. Whether this moment becomes a turning point or a missed opportunity depends on how seriously the warning is taken. Water has always shaped human destiny, and Tehran is now facing that truth in its most direct form. This is not just an environmental issue. It is an economic, social, and moral challenge that tests priorities and responsibility. As taps run dry, the illusion of control fades, revealing how deeply connected modern life is to natural systems. The final warning has arrived, and ignoring it is no longer an option, because the cost of inaction is already being paid, one empty reservoir at a time.